Gonna be talking about in this session adoption and follow-up, safely placing aggressive pets in homes. And as I sat down and really started to work on this lecture, I realized that's kind of crazy. Safely placing aggressive pets in homes, there's no way to 100% safely place an aggressive pet in a home other than not to place them in the home. But we do everything we can at the Animal Rescue League of Boston to minimize that risk, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. The study done by Anastasia Spang, who finished a master's program at the Tufts Center for Animals and Public Policy, and she did this study from July to September of 2010, so 10-week period, and I'm going to share some of the information from it here. So this was a survey about visitor attitudes, so we could know more about the people coming in to see us. We asked demographic information. We asked them whether they had plans to adopt versus just looking, trying to find out if people who came in and didn't leave with an animal, whether it was because we didn't have the right pet available for them or whether they were just browsing. Why they made an adoption decision versus not, characteristics of the pet that they're looking for, as well as their perceptions of the animals in the shelter. So a couple slides here sharing the results of this. Remembering that these are results from our study, so a formal research study that was done, but this is our shelter, and the results may very well not be the same in different communities, and I very much encourage you. We had volunteers help us with this study, and I feel it gave us some pretty valuable information. So our shelter's role in finding a home for our dogs and our cats is to relax our animals as much as possible, make them as happy as possible, so that they will hopefully display behaviors that adopters like and make adopters say, I should take this cat home. The next dog I'm going to talk about is Vinny. Vinny came from a neglect case. He was a group of 17 rat terrier mixes that we rescued in this past September. Most of these dogs had very significant fear of new people and new environments. Vinny was one of 4 rat terriers that I took into my home and fostered, so that we probably had in our Boston shelter, we have 20 cages in our shelter, and at one point in time 8 of those cages were taken up by rat terriers. So we were overwhelmed by rat terriers, and we still have not found homes for all of them. But Vinny was in my house for quite a while to get him more used to the world. They came from a situation where they lived out on a farm, and the person who had them, when I talked to her, told me that 2 of the dogs that she had were her special dogs that she gave attention to, but she called all the other dogs aggressive, and she didn't even really try to touch them. She lived in a trailer, and she told me that she kept the dogs indoors, but she couldn't keep them in groups of more than 4 of them together, or they would all try to hurt each other. And when we picked these dogs up, they all had hay all over them. So a lot of the circumstances of their history were kind of confusing and garbled, but they probably all lived outside and really didn't get much attention, which explains why they had the problems that they did. So on the other side of the coin, some shelters have very, very stringent rules based on their experiences. Some of these rules are very valuable. Other rules might exclude excellent potential adopters. I'm sure we all have friends, family, co-workers, people that we know that have been declined for adoption from a particular shelter because of some factor where we know this person is going to provide a wonderful home for a particular pet, but because a given shelter has stringent criteria, they weren't allowed to have that pet. And this is something that I think has become more and more of a hot topic, and it's something that we're all thinking about more and more as we progress in our shelters, understanding that if I decline this person, he or she can just go down the street to a pet store and buy a pet. And if this person is going to get a pet some way, somehow, would I rather they get a pet from me, where I'm hopefully going to provide them with resources to help make things successful, versus the pet store down the street? And those are all ethical decisions we have to make, and I'll make decisions for our individual shelters and for our populations, and what we'll be talking about today. So what we've been talking about is rules, we've been talking about exceptions, and I think my feeling is that most of us here in the room are shelters that are very flexible and that we have rules, we have criteria that we try to meet. Sometimes we make exceptions, sometimes we say an exception cannot be made, and I think it's very, very important for us to very clearly define when that happens versus when we're willing to be more flexible. We have another comment over here.
Do you have any rules or procedures that look at screening out people who you would not want to adopt to? Perhaps people who have animal cruelty records, or persons, well, let's start with that.
Yeah, so rules for people, and I'd love to hear how others of you manage this issue as well, but dealing with people who we can very pretty clearly hopefully say that this is not a good home for our pets. We certainly have within our own computer software database people who say do not adopt any of our pets out to this home. So we had last year a man who over the course of 2 years surrendered something like 10 different golden retrievers to us. Most of them were very nice dogs, and we easily found homes for them. But this is a dog this was a guy who, if our life depended on it, we're not giving this guy a dog because he's going to end up surrendering it back to us or someone else. So we certainly do have people based on their history that we're going to decline adoption to them. We, on our adopter application, ask what recent pets they've had and what happened to them, so we can attempt to find out if they're doing things like letting the dogs roam and getting hit by cars or not providing them with proper medical care. We also, in our community, if we have an adopter that we know was cruel to his animal or a pet that surrendered where we know there's cruelty, we oftentimes will contact the other sheltering organizations in our community so that everybody's aware that if this person comes to your shelter, do not adopt a pet out to them. And the next dog I'm going to talk about is Rocky. So these are all dogs that we made exceptions to our rules. In general, a 35-point dog in our shelter is a dog that is generally considered unadoptable, but we'll make exceptions. Rocky, a 3-year-old smoky gray neutered male Chihuahua. Mix, really cute little guy if you like that kind of dog. We didn't have any intake information available on him, but he snapped during handling, during our behavior evaluation, and via time spent with him in the shelter, he had fear aggression towards people. So he growled, lunged, and snapped at people he didn't know. I hate to say typical Chihuahua, but he was a typical Chihuahua mix who, to people who he knew, he was sweet, wiggly, cuddly, friendly. If he didn't know you and you tried to come close to him, he would snap at you. He wouldn't allow people to put the leash onto his harness and pick him up unless they got to know him. He hadn't bitten anyone, but he had come close. So he was a challenging little guy. So what about this type of dog? How many of you would place this type of dog up for adoption?